Garden burnout, it's a real thing. Some of us are feeling it this time of year after a long, hot summer. We're just kind of sick of it. We're done managing the weeds, we're done managing the plants, and we want to go inside and maybe take some R&R and just step away from the garden a little bit. If that's you, that's okay. But if you are going to step away from the garden, what are you doing now to help your garden be productive when you want to get back into gardening? Maybe that's later this fall, maybe that's in the early spring. Today we're going to talk about an easy way to manage the garden instead of just letting it sit there. That doesn't require much management from you at all. Let's talk about that coming up. Thanks for watching the video today. I'm your host, Diego, D-I-E-G-O, and today we are talking passive garden management. Like many of you, I'm just kind of sick of gardening at this point in time. And honestly, if I wasn't making YouTube videos, I would probably take a month off out here and just let things chill. But when it comes to letting the garden chill, I don't mean just pulling out the plants and leaving the bare soil exposed. I think at the very least, you should cover it at least with a sheet of plastic to help hold moisture in. I think that really does help the soil. But I think you can do even better for the soil with just a little bit more work, emphasis on a little bit more work. So how can you do that? How can you advance a bed with just little work? It sounds like a free lunch, right? Well, it is possible. And for example, I have this bed right here that I want to plant potatoes in February. Between now and then, I don't want to grow any sort of edible crop in them. I don't want to grow kale or winter squash or any of that type of stuff. I just want to let this bed sit and be as passive as possible. Instead of letting this bed go fallow and just sit there with bare soil exposed, I decided to put a cover crop into it. Why? Putting a cover crop into the soil does a few things. It keeps a living root in the soil and it keeps the soil covered. The soil coverage is good because it slows down rain when it will hit the soil. It doesn't let the rain impact the soil as hard, which can create some issues. It also keeps it shaded from the sun. It keeps a cooler microclimate right at soil surface, good for the microbes. It's generating a lot of above ground organic matter that we can use in our garden in a variety of ways. It's maybe providing a beneficial habitat for insects in our area. It's also doing a lot below ground with the biomass that it's producing. Those roots that are going down are opening channels in the soil. They're putting sugars down into the soil, which are feeding the microbiology. All good things. Everything about a cover crop is really good, except maybe the one thing I hear a lot of people say in the comments is, I'd love to go cover crops, but honestly, they're just too much work. Too much work. This is something I want to challenge. Are cover crops really too much work, or do you just think they're too much work? I think it's more people thinking that they're too much work than people actually having done it and realizing there are too much work. Because once you've actually done it, you'll realize that they're not that much work at all. I'm going to go through all the steps involved in planting a cover crop from seed to termination, and I'm going to rank all those steps in terms of an effort level from 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest, 1 being the easiest. A 1 out of 10 is like you just literally drop seed on the ground. You're not even looking. It's like, I just planted some seed. That's a 1 out of 10. A 5 out of 10 might be harvesting potatoes. It's physical work. You got to do a lot of digging. You're bending over, you're picking up the potatoes, you're lugging the potatoes inside, you're cleaning them. There's a fair amount of work involved there. And then a 10 out of 10 would be installing a greenhouse, where it's a humongous project, tools are involved, time is involved, it's physical, you might need a team to do it. It's a massive undertaking. So 1 out of 10, super easy, 10 out of 10, a lot of work. Let's look at planting a cover crop. Step number 1 in planting a cover crop is bed prep or soil preparation, and I'm gonna give that a score of 2 out of 10. It's pretty darn easy, considering you just pull the crop out of this bed that you want to put the cover crop into. The bed should be in pretty good shape. It should be clean of all organic matter, or the big chunky organic matter. And all you have to do now is really rake it level and maybe tidy up your irrigation system. You don't have to fertilize, you don't have to amend the soil, you don't have to broad fork, you don't have to do any of that stuff, you don't have to till, none of that. No compost addition, none of it, none of it, none of it. So bed prep, pretty darn easy. Rake it, neaten up the bed. It doesn't really get much easier than that. Step number 2 is seeding the cover crop. Now there's a couple ways you can seed a cover crop. You can do the 1 out of 10 approach of just dropping it, broadcasting it out, and using a rake to kind of rake it in. Personally, I have never had success with that, so I don't do it. I don't recommend it. I would only seed a cover crop using a seeder, whether that's an earthway seeder, a jang seeder, or something else. But I would use a seeder to do that, and that is really a 1 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. You just pour the seed into the seeder and you walk it up and down the bed, barely pushing it in front of you. Not much effort involved at all. So 1 out of 10 involved there. And cover cropping itself is pretty cheap. I mean, you might only be talking $10 to $20 of seed per acre. So seeding a small bed like this is cents. It's not a lot of money and it's super easy. Step number 3, cover crop management. In terms of management, let's say you're not going to use a chop and drop approach. You just want the cover crop to grow until you terminate it. Well, this step involves watching it grow. So like, I'm going to illustrate that step right now. That's obviously a 1 out of 10, pretty easy, no actual work required, and you can actually do that from inside your house while you're watching football or something else on TV. You can kind of glance out the window, oh yeah, that cover crop out there, it's doing good. 1 out of 10, pretty easy. So if you look at our steps so far, bed prep, seeding, and management, they're either a 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. Pretty darn easy. Not a lot of work is required. So I think it's fair to say at this stage of the game, work of cover cropping, pretty easy. Now the 4th and final step is terminating the cover crop. And this is where things can get a little tricky and possibly get a little more difficult. I think termination can range from a 1 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10, depending on how you want to terminate the cover crop and where you live. So let's look at that. When it comes to terminating a cover crop, I came up with 4 ways to terminate a cover crop. If I'm missing anything, please leave it in the comments below. But these are the 4 general categories that I thought of when it comes from terminating a cover crop, from easiest to hardest. And hardest really isn't that hard. It's just harder than easiest. So number 1 way to terminate a cover crop is to do nothing and let it winter kill. Depending on your location, you can select a cover crop that will die off when colder weather comes. This is a great passive option for managing a cover crop. How do I kill it? The weather will kill it for me. Pretty easy. That is a 1 out of 10. Now it's not going to work in all locations. We don't get reliable frosts here, so I can't really rely on a winter kill cover crop because my winter kill might be somewhere between Christmas and maybe February 15th. But I don't want to rely on that killing a cover crop, so it's not an option for me. But some of you in temperate climates, this is a great option. You plant your cover crop in the fall, it kills itself over the winter, or the winter climate kills it, and then it just decomposes on soil surface. No work required from you. Pretty easy. Slightly moving up a level of difficulty is we could use an herbicide to kill the cover crop. Now this could be a conventional herbicide like Roundup, or it could be an organic herbicide, whether that's citric acid or vinegar based, but we could spray it to kill it. I know this is controversial, but it is an option in the toolkit, and this is how some farms on the large scale actually manage their cover crops. They kill them off with herbicides. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I wouldn't choose to manage my land that way, but it is an option in the toolkit, and it's pretty easy because you're just spraying it and it goes away. The third option for terminating a cover crop is to mow it down. Now this could be with some sort of mower, it could be with a flail mower, it could be with a scythe, and it could be with grazing animals. But you find some way to mechanically drop the cover crop to the ground, cutting it off as low as possible near the surface, whether that's petroleum-based, electric-based, or animal or human-based power to do so. I will score that a 3 out of 10, depending on what type of machine you're using. If you're just riding on a tractor and it's mowing down, well, that's up there with spraying, is pretty easy. But if you're using a scythe or, a small hand sickle, that's a little bit more physical. Maybe it's a 3 out of 10, but still pretty easy. Mowing it down is the third way to terminate a cover crop. The fourth way to terminate a cover crop is by tarping. This can be great for some harder to kill cover crops. If you don't live in an area where crops winter kill, you don't want to use sprays, and mowing alone won't take the cover crop out, you might want to involve tarping. Tarping is simple. You mow the cover crop down, you put a plastic tarp over it, and bada bing, bada boom, you're on your way to building soil in place. I'll score this a 3.5 out of 10. I mean, it's slightly higher than mowing because there is an extra step involved of dragging the tarp over the bed. I've tried just tarping a cover crop without mowing. I don't think it works that well. I think you do need that additional step of mowing to get the cover crop onto the surface to make good soil surface contact. And I also think you need to reduce the particle size and kind of chop up the cover crop a bit if you want to expedite termination and breaking that cover crop down so the soil can digest it. But tarping is the fourth way to terminate a cover crop. The fifth and probably hardest way to till a cover crop is to till it in. Tilling it in may or may not involve mowing the cover crop before you till it in. You could use a rototiller, you could use a disc or a plow on the back of a tractor, you could use pigs, and you could till it in by hand with just a pitchfork. So depending on how you do it, it may or may not be hard. If it's tractor-based, it's pretty easy. If it's more hand-based, it's going to be harder. You probably are gonna have to mow, so we have to inherently be higher than mowing in terms of difficulty. So it's somewhere between 3.5 and 5, depending on how you do it. Nonetheless, pretty easy. If we add up the work involved in those 4 steps, bed prep, seeding, management, termination, we have not much work, plus not much work, plus not much work, plus really not that much work. Now, I'm only a homeschool math teacher, but when I add those up, I get it's not that much work. It's really not. I mean, think about those steps. Am I missing something? Am I getting something wrong? If you thought cover crops were too much work, what part of that do you think is a lot of work? I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I'm just trying to really state the obvious and break it down into the simplest terms that it is. And it's really simple. So next time you get garden burnout or you want to take a break from the field and you might otherwise let that land sit fallow, stop and consider planting a cover crop because your soil will thank you and it might not be as much work as you thought after all. If you agree with me or disagree with me, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts and your experience on cover cropping. But really, I don't think it's as hard as people make it out to be. Thanks for watching this one. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.